I only wanted a place to call home, but ever since I was a kid, I was forced to yield to my brother at every turn. After being reborn, I stopped obsessing over a mere bedroom and set my sights on the massive resources behind the Miller family estate. In my previous life, my brother was ruthless in his pursuit of the inheritance and eventually stole my very last refuge. This time, I'm going to hold on to every single thing my stepfather gives me and tear off my brother's mask of being a hard worker. I will expose his secret stash of comics and his habit of spending all his time on suggestive live streams. I refuse to ever mistreat myself again just to make life easier for him. After my father passed away, Ava remarried into a wealthy family. My new stepfather, Mr. Sterling, made it clear that she was only allowed to bring one child with her to his estate in Chicago. My younger brother, Tyler, knelt on the floor in front of me, desperately begging for the chance to go with her. He sobbed and told me that because I was smart and resilient, I was better suited to stay behind and work the land in our small Iowa town. He claimed that without Ava there to take care of him, he wouldn't be able to survive another day. Ultimately, I gave in, chose to drop out of school, and stay behind to work the fields. Tyler followed Ava to the city to start his new life at a prestigious school. However, once he got there, he became completely obsessed with a popular social media influencer. He took every cent of his tuition money and blew it on digital gifts for a trending TikTok streamer named Lexi. He went as far as swearing to everyone that she was his one true love. My stepfather was absolutely livid and immediately cut off all of his tuition and living expenses. Instead of repenting, Tyler started plotting a way to get his hands on the old family house our father had left us. While I was away working long hours at a construction site, he snuck back to town behind my back and sold the house out from under me. He even had the audacity to claim that if he could just send Lexi one more round of expensive gifts, she would finally agree to marry him. He truly believed she was going to settle down with him and carry on our family legacy. At the time, I was busy hauling heavy bricks across a dusty construction site. The moment I heard the news, my chest tightened with such intense fury that I suffered a massive heart attack right there. I plummeted from the high scaffolding and stopped breathing before I even hit the ground. To make matters worse, Tyler even managed to snatch the insurance settlement for my death just to keep sending gifts to Lexi. My hatred for him was the very first thing I felt when I finally opened my eyes again. I woke up consumed by a level of resentment I had never known before. When my vision cleared, I realized I had been sent back to the exact day Tyler was kneeling on the floor begging me to stay in Iowa. This time, I didn't hesitate to kick him aside as I walked straight toward my stepfather. A pathetic loser like him doesn't even deserve the chance to be a top donor for some influencer. James, you're so smart and capable. You can make a great life for yourself right here in town, he whined. He told me that he would literally waste away and die if he were forced to be away from Ava. That familiar, manipulative voice instantly dragged me back from the cold, endless darkness of death. The sickening sensation of weightlessness and the sheer terror of falling from the scaffolding were still echoing in my soul. My entire body was shaking uncontrollably from the trauma. But as my eyes focused on the face of the person crouching in front of me, I recognized him immediately as my brother, Tyler. Looking at that all-too-familiar face brought me crashing back to reality. I wondered for a split second if I had actually been reborn. My heart started racing as the realization began to set in. In my previous life, it was this version of Tyler who knelt pitifully at my feet and begged me to let him go. He wanted the chance to follow Ava and Mr. Sterling to Chicago and live a life of luxury. Meanwhile, he expected me to stay behind and rot in our tiny hometown. Tyler is my twin brother, born only 10 minutes after I was. Back then, I couldn't stand the thought of him suffering alongside me through poverty. I eventually bit my tongue and agreed to his selfish request. I had no way of knowing that the moment Tyler left with Ava, my personal nightmare was only just beginning. In the early days, Ava would still send me a small amount of money to cover my basic living expenses. Eventually, the task of sending the money was handed over to my brother. My monthly allowance of $500 quickly dwindled until I was lucky to see that amount once every 4 or 5 months. Tyler claimed that Mr. Sterling was going through some financial struggles and that this pittance was all they could afford to send me. That tiny amount of money wasn't even enough to cover my daily groceries, let alone my school tuition. Fortunately, my stepfather had at least left an old cottage in my name, so I wouldn't be completely homeless. At a very young age, I was forced to start working every odd job I could find just to stay afloat. However, due to poor nutrition, my body remained chronically weak and I was constantly falling ill. During a year of my SATs, I was so unwell and broke that I couldn't even make it to the testing center and was forced to drop out of school. It wasn't that I lacked the ambition to study, but I simply couldn't afford to continue my education. It wasn't until much later that I discovered my stepfather was actually incredibly wealthy. Tyler had been living a life of luxury the entire time, surrounded by designer clothes, high-end gaming rigs, and a sprawling penthouse. He even had a luxury car, and everything else I never even dared to dream of owning. But Tyler was never satisfied with what he had and became hopelessly obsessed with a TikTok streamer named Lexi. He threw all of his money into sending her digital gifts and eventually maxed out several credit cards in the process. When my stepfather found out, he tried to reason with Tyler multiple times, but his advice fell on deaf ears. In the end, he had no other choice but to freeze every single one of Tyler's accounts. Instead of learning his lesson, the guy decided to set his sights on the cottage my stepfather had left for me. On the day I found out that Tyler had sold my only asset, I happened to be working high up on a construction ledge. My vision blurred from the shock, and I stumbled right off the edge of the building. I died instantly upon impact. In this life, I am never going to let Tyler take away another thing that belongs to me. I stared coldly at Tyler and told him that since we were both Ava's children, we should let her make the final decision. Ava looked back and forth between the two of us, her face etched with clear hesitation and conflict. Tyler immediately shifted into his victim persona and clung to Ava's arm like a spoiled child. He reminded her that she knew better than anyone how capable and smart I was, and claimed I wouldn't starve if I stayed in the village by myself. "But I can't do it, Mom. My health has always been fragile, and I need you for everything," he whined, asking how she could possibly have the heart to leave him behind. In my previous life, Ava heard those exact words and made her choice without a second thought. I was the one who had always stayed home to handle the chores, and I was the one who practically raised Tyler while she was away working. She knew exactly what kind of person Tyler was deep down inside. She had finally managed to secure a spot in a wealthy household, and she knew bringing a burden like me along would make her look bad to my stepfather. If I hadn't been so stubborn about letting Tyler take the opportunity back then, things might have been different. If I hadn't insisted that I was perfectly capable of taking care of myself, Tyler would never have been given such a golden opportunity. Having already guessed which way Ava was leaning, Tyler quickly turned his manipulative gaze toward my stepfather. He grabbed my stepfather's hand and called him Dad in a voice that was sickeningly sweet. He claimed that he was nothing like me and had always been the loyal son, while I was supposedly the antisocial one who always gave Ava trouble. "If you take me with you, I promise I'll be the best son you could ask for," he promised. I was genuinely shocked at how easily he could twist the truth just to make himself look better while stepping all over me. The most disgusting part was how naturally he used the word dad, which honestly gave me the creeps. My stepfather didn't actually know either of us very well since he hadn't been with Ava for long. Ava had actually kept the existence of her twin sons a secret until after they were already married. My stepfather had been absolutely furious when he found out, but luckily, he didn't call for a divorce. He simply stated coldly that he was only willing to take one of us with them to Chicago. It was pretty clear that this was his way of punishing Ava for being dishonest with him. Unlike Tyler, who was charming and always knew exactly what to say to please people, I was always more reserved. I was the type to keep to myself, and naturally, adults always gravitated toward the kid who was more charismatic. What Tyler didn't realize was that I had literally crawled my way back from the depths of hell this time. If I really wanted to play his games, I could do it better than he ever could. I just used to think it was beneath me. As I saw my stepfather's expression soften slightly, I took a step forward and mimicked Tyler's sugary tone perfectly. "Dad, I've spent my whole life working hard and helping Ava with every chore around the house while Tyler was always the one being coddled, I said. I suggested that it was finally time for Tyler to learn how to grow up and become a little more independent on his own. Tyler glared at me with a look so full of venom it felt like a physical strike. He was clearly fuming with hatred, but in the blink of an eye, he switched back to his act of being a poor, misunderstood victim. "James, why do you always have to try and take everything away from me?" he asked with a shaky voice. He questioned what he had ever done to deserve such treatment, claiming he only wanted a real home and a father figure in his life. My stepfather might not have known the full history, but he could definitely tell something was off as he watched us go back and forth. I was far too smart to fall into the emotional trap that Tyler was trying to set for me. Instead, I turned my gaze toward Ava and gave her a look that silently pleaded for her help. Tyler wasn't the only one who knew how to turn on the waterworks, even though I had spent my childhood being too tough to ever let her see me cry. It was exactly that toughness that led to all the unfairness and favoritism being piled on my shoulders while Tyler got all the attention. In Ava's eyes, it seemed like Tyler was always the one who was too fragile to handle real life. If she hadn't been so worried about what my stepfather would think, she would have chosen Tyler in a heartbeat during my last life. I realize now that family bonds were really just a cover for people looking out for their own best interests, and Ava was no different. The truth was that I actually held much better cards than Tyler in this situation. Now was the perfect moment to play those cards and show them exactly why I was the better choice to take to Chicago. Tyler probably never imagined in his wildest dreams that the brother who always gave in to him would suddenly stand his ground. For the first time in our lives, I was actually stepping up to challenge him for what I deserved. I lifted my head and let my eyes fill with tears, making sure I looked as vulnerable and heartbroken as possible. "Mom, I don't care if we have to live in poverty. I just want to be with you," I said with a heavy, trembling voice. "You know how hard I've worked for my grades, but if I'm left here all alone, I know I'll end up having to drop out of school," I continued. I pointed out that Tyler was different because he had never really cared about his education in the first place. "I promise that if I can stay with you, I will work harder than ever in my studies," I told her. I even added that once I graduated, I would be the one to support the family and look after Tyler. Ava had never actually mentioned how much money my stepfather had, so at that time, neither Tyler nor I were supposed to know he was wealthy. It was a secret she was keeping close to her chest during the transition to our new life. In reality, Tyler had already been snooping around and knew exactly how much my stepfather was worth, but he lied to me and claimed they were broke. He pretended that his only motivation for going was to be a dutiful son to Ava. Back then, I figured life would be a struggle no matter where I was, so I let him have the spot since he acted so attached to her. If I hadn't been reborn with all my memories, I probably would have fallen for his "I can't live without mom" act all over again. He talked a big game about needing to stay with Ava, but at the end of the day, he just wanted to live like a trust fund baby in the city. My stepfather looked at me with a hint of surprise, but before he could say a word, Tyler cut him off. "James, what on earth are you talking about?" Tyler snapped. He accused me of being wicked and suggested that by talking about suffering, I was basically wishing for our stepfather's successful business to fail. He immediately turned back to our stepfather with a fawning expression and told him not to pay me any mind. He claimed that I had always been the type to talk big, just to act tough, and that he was used to my behavior. Tyler had completely dropped his mask of brotherly love, which actually suited my plans perfectly. I just gave him a small, calm smile and reminded him that he was the one who had just described life with Ava as a struggle. As soon as I said it, I could see the realization dawn on Tyler's face that he had walked right into my trap. He stumbled over his words for a second before frantically trying to explain that he had actually heard that Mr. Sterling was doing quite well. I knew Tyler better than anyone, and I knew that once he was caught in a lie, he would start talking in circles. No matter how much he tried to justify himself, it was starting to sound like nothing more than desperate damage control. My stepfather's face darkened visibly as he turned to look me in the eye. He asked me if I was truly willing to face a hard life alongside them, and I simply nodded while keeping my eyes damp and red. Ava has spent her entire life sacrificing everything for the two of us, and I just want to be there to make things a little easier for her, I said softly. When she heard that, a genuine look of relief and pride finally crossed her face. My stepfather gave a slight nod, his expression showing a newfound respect for my attitude. Tyler was absolutely fuming, looking like he wanted to tear me apart right then and there. I quickly lowered my gaze to make sure the darkness in my own eyes stayed hidden from them. In the end, my stepfather made the final call to bring me to Chicago and leave the family cottage to Tyler. Even though Tyler knew the decision was final, he wasn't about to let me enjoy my victory in peace. Right before we climbed into the car, he put on a big show of being heartbroken and gripped my hand tightly. He made sure to speak loudly enough so that both Ava and my stepfather would hear every word he said. "James, I'm truly happy for you, but I just hope you don't resort to cheating once you get to the city and embarrass our new father," he said with a smirk. He knew exactly what he was doing because my academic success was the main reason my stepfather was interested in me. He was trying to plant a seed of doubt in my stepfather's mind right from the start. If this were my previous life, I would have been frantic to defend myself and would have fallen straight into his trap. But this time, I just gave him a calm smile and kept my composure. Tyler was being incredibly naive because even if my stepfather appeared to listen to him, he was also witnessing Tyler's blatant jealousy. I knew that as long as I kept my head down and worked hard, the truth would eventually come to light. Seeing that I wasn't the least bit rattled by his accusations, Tyler's expression soured even further. Tyler was practically vibrating with rage as he leaned in to whisper in my ear. He threatened to ruin my new life in the city if I didn't start sending him monthly payments for my allowance. "If I can't have the good life, I'm going to make sure you can enjoy it either," he hissed. I just patted him on the shoulder and made sure to speak loudly enough for everyone to hear when I asked why he was suggesting I lie to our father for money. "We're still young, and we should be focusing on building our own futures through hard work," I said firmly. I promised him that once I got to the city, I would find a part-time job and send him whatever extra money I could earn. As soon as those words left my mouth, the entire area went dead silent. Every single person there turned to look at Tyler, whose face instantly turned a deep shade of crimson. He pointed a finger at me, but he was so flustered that he couldn't even get a coherent sentence out. I reached out and gently lowered his finger, putting on my best supportive older brother act. I told him that regardless of where we were living, we were still brothers and needed to support each other's futures. No matter how hard things get for me in Chicago, I'll make sure you never have to go without, I promised. Tyler had been trying to drag my reputation through the mud, so I figured it was only fair to return the favor. I saw no reason why I shouldn't fight back using the exact same manipulative tactics he loved so much. My stepfather looked at Tyler with nothing but pure disappointment before let out a heavy sigh and putting the car in gear to leave. While we were driving, my stepfather suddenly suggested sending Tyler a $10,000 monthly allowance. Ava didn't immediately say no, but she turned to me and asked for my honest opinion on the matter. A flash of memory from my previous life hit me, reminding me that my so-called allowance back then had been a pathetic $500. I remember how much I had complained to Ava about not being able to survive on such a tiny amount. Back then, I foolishly assumed Ava was just having a hard time adjusting to her new life with Tyler constantly being a financial drain. But looking back now, I finally understand what was really going on behind the scenes. In my previous life, the very first thing my stepfather did when discussing an allowance was ask for Tyler's input. My gaze turned cold as I realized just how much they had been keeping from me. I had spent my entire life making sure Tyler had everything he ever wanted, often sacrificing my own needs and savings just to make him happy. I had literally gone without food just to make sure he could have the same things as the other kids. I never would have guessed that my own brother harbored such a deep, visceral hatred for me. I gritted my teeth and forced a polite smile before telling my stepfather that $10,000 was far too much. Tyler is still young and won't have any real supervision out there, so giving him that much money will only lead to bad habits, I explained. I told him that handing him that kind of cash would likely just end up ruining his future in the long run. Besides, the cost of living in our small town is practically nothing, and he'll have grandma there to look after him, I added. I suggested that $500 a month would be more than enough to cover everything he needed. Ava looked at me with a sense of pure shock and disbelief. In her mind, I had always been the doting older brother who would do anything to protect Tyler's interests. My stepfather, on the other hand, gave me a look of genuine approval for my sensible approach. I took the opportunity to add that they were already doing so much for me and that I didn't want to be any more of a burden than necessary. I plan on working hard to earn my own money so I can send extra help to Tyler in the future, I promised. Hearing that, Ava finally let out a long, relieved sigh and seemed to relax. After I insisted and gave them my word, both Ava and my stepfather finally agreed to set Tyler's allowance at exactly what I suggested. They decided that $500 a month was a perfectly reasonable amount for his needs. The moment I stepped through the front doors of my stepfather's estate, the sheer scale and luxury of the mansion took my breath away. In my previous life, I had only ever known that he was pretty well off from the stories I heard. It wasn't until after I had dropped out and was working menial jobs that I began to piece the truth together from Tyler's constant, arrogant bragging over the phone. He loved to rub his wealthy lifestyle in my face whenever he called. Seeing it all in person made it incredibly difficult to keep my composure. However, I knew I couldn't afford to look like a clueless country boy in front of my stepfather, so I forced myself to stay calm. I remembered that in my last life, my stepfather had frozen all of Tyler's accounts because of his complete lack of financial self-control and his obsession with luxury brands. He had eventually maxed out every single card he was given. It was very clear that my stepfather had zero patience for kids who only knew how to spend money without working for it. No matter how much he loved Ava, he was never going to truly accept someone he viewed as a useless financial drain. I knew right then that I had to prove my worth to him if I wanted to survive in this new world. Of course, I also made sure to show him that I was deeply grateful for the opportunity he was giving me. When I noticed my stepfather quietly observing my reaction to the house, I took a deep breath and let a few tears slowly roll down my cheeks. He looked at me with a hint of concern and asked me what was bothering me. I wiped my eyes and whispered that I had always imagined him and Ava were struggling just to make ends meet in the city. I told him I had spent so much time worrying that they were sacrificing their own comfort just to survive. Seeing how beautiful this place is actually makes me feel a little guilty because I know how much hard work must have gone into achieving all of this, I said softly. I told him that everything was so perfect that I felt bad for not being able to contribute anything to the household. My stepfather gave me a warm smile and patted me on the head, telling me how much he appreciated my mature and caring attitude. My hands were actually shaking with excitement as he instructed the house staff to show me to my new bedroom. I stood there staring at a room filled with designer clothing, a massive, plush bed, and decor that I had never even imagined in my wildest dreams. Even with the memories of 2 lifetimes, this was the very first time I had ever truly belonged in a world like this. In my previous life, I had never truly had a space to call my own. Even though I technically owned that old cottage, I was forced to share it with Grandma, and eventually my uncle's entire family moved in as well. My cousin ended up taking the bedroom that was supposed to be mine, while my uncle and aunt claimed the master suite for themselves. I was the only one who was forced to sleep on a thin mattress on the floor of the storage room. Back then, I wasn't nearly as ruthless as Tyler eventually became. As soon as he decided he wanted that house for himself, he didn't hesitate for a second before kicking our uncle's entire family out onto the street. I was so incredibly naive in my past life, thinking that my own suffering didn't matter as long as I still had a place to call home and a warm meal. I spent all my time being the bigger person and letting others walk all over me just to keep the peace. But looking back now, I have to ask myself why I ever put up with it. I was the one making all the sacrifices while the people who contributed nothing lived much better lives than I did. I have no intention of being that foolish ever again. I've had more than enough of the grueling days spent on construction sites where one wrong step could mean certain death. That very night, Tyler gave me a call, and I could hear the sheer rage in his voice the moment I answered. "James, How could you be so incredibly cruel? He screamed into the phone. He accused me of trying to sabotage his future as a wealthy socialite and told me that I deserved to die. I knew him well enough to know he wasn't going to just let this go without a fight. Even though everything was already set in stone, he was still looking for any way he could to make my life difficult. Mr. Sterling was literally about to give me $10,000 a month. So why did you have to open your mouth and suggest 500? He demanded. Before I could even attempt to explain my reasoning, he launched into another tirade of insults. It was pretty obvious that Ava had already told him exactly what happened during the car ride. It just went to show that in her heart, Tyler was always going to be her top priority. If this had happened in my first life, I probably would have been heartbroken for a long time. I remember so clearly when I was forced to drop out and work construction, all I wanted was enough money to buy a cheap electric bike to get to work. I finally built up the courage to call Ava and ask if she could lend me a little bit of money for the bike. She just gave me a cold response, telling me that I was an adult with my own house and that I shouldn't be so greedy. After my fatal accident on the site, Tyler didn't even hesitate to blow every penny of my death benefit on his own lifestyle. To make matters worse, Ava actually lied to the authorities and claimed I had taken my own life just to spare Tyler from public criticism. I really should have realized back then that both she and Tyler were fundamentally selfish people who only cared about themselves. Now that I have a second chance, I have zero expectations that she will ever truly have my back. She only told Tyler the truth about the allowance because she didn't want him to be angry with her personally. I have to admit, she's always been incredibly talented at shifting the blame onto someone else. I kept my voice perfectly calm as I told him that my last name was Sterling now. I informed him that from now on, he should address me as James Sterling or simply Mr. Sterling. And yes, I was the one who suggested the lower allowance. Because why should I help you when you've done nothing but try to bring me down? I asked. I told him he should probably start worrying about his own situation since he was about to lose that cottage in a matter of days. I hung up the phone without giving him a chance to respond to my warning. It's a shame Tyler hasn't been reborn like I have, because I would have loved to describe every single bit of suffering he caused me in the past. I would have enjoyed watching him squirm in his own guilt and regret for everything he did. Since I won't get that specific satisfaction, I'll just have to settle for watching him slowly ruin his own life without even realizing it. I knew exactly why Ava hadn't tried to sneak Tyler any extra cash under the table. She simply didn't have the guts to do it. She was far too afraid of what my stepfather would do if he found out she was lying to him. Since Mr. Sterling was paying for every single one of her expenses, she wasn't about to risk her comfortable lifestyle by sending money to a child from her previous marriage. She knew that any sign of disloyalty could result in her being cut off completely. Supporting a child from her past life would be seen as a major betrayal if it ever came to light. Because of that, she would only ever show Tyler favoritism in her words, but she would never dare to touch the actual family finances. I stopped wasting my time trying to figure out what her next move would be and focused entirely on protecting my own interests. My only goal now was to establish myself in the Sterling family and earn my stepfather's complete trust and respect. I didn't care about family ties or blood relations anymore. All I wanted was to secure my financial future. My stepfather had already arranged for me to transfer to the most prestigious prep school in Chicago. Since it was already the second semester of my senior year and my old school in Iowa was severely lacking in resources, my first set of midterm grades were only average. I knew I had a lot of ground to make up if I wanted to impress the faculty here. I was feeling a bit anxious as I walked home with my report card in hand, wondering how my stepfather would react. To my surprise, I walked through the door to find Tyler already sitting comfortably in our living room. I was caught off guard, but he just gave me a smug look as if he belonged there and told me he had come to visit. He mentioned that he had heard midterms were over and claimed he was there to share his own academic progress with Ava. There was something unsettling about the way he was looking at me that I couldn't quite put my finger on. In the past, Tyler's manipulative nature was usually tempered by a certain level of stupidity that made his schemes easy to spot. But today, there was a certain darkness in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. Both Ava and my stepfather were sitting on the sofa, clearly waiting for me to arrive. My stepfather seemed genuinely interested in my performance and immediately asked to see my report card. I hesitated for just a moment before reaching into my backpack to pull it out for him. Tyler suddenly lunged forward and snatched the bag right out of my hands, dumping the entire contents onto the floor. He grabbed my report card and handed it to my stepfather with a malicious, triumphant grin on his face. As soon as my stepfather looked at the paper, his expression soured because my scores were significantly lower than what he had expected. Tyler just stood there looking incredibly smug as he watched the disappointment grow on my stepfather's face. "See what happens when you actually have to do the work yourself, James?" Tyler mocked. He claimed that I had only done well in the past because I was cheating and that the strict environment here had finally caught up with me. "It's pretty embarrassing to fail like this right in front of our parents," he said with a laugh. He made sure to mention that while he wasn't at the top of his class, he had managed to secure a spot in the top 10 at his school. He handed over his own report card with both hands, as if it were some kind of prize for my stepfather to admire. Mr. Sterling's expression was hard to read as he looked between the two of us, though the disappointment in his eyes was unmistakable. I found myself feeling more curious than upset about the whole situation. Tyler had spent his entire life at the very bottom of his class, so the idea of him suddenly becoming a top student seemed highly suspicious. I was certain that there was some kind of foul play involved in his sudden academic success. I was just about to question him when he seemed to anticipate my move and quickly spoke up first. "Mom, Dad, I know you've always thought James was the more talented one, but I've been working incredibly hard lately," he promised. He told them he was going to ace his SATs and that he hoped he could eventually move back to Chicago to be with them. I had no idea that his plan for the visit was to manipulate his way back into the Sterling household. Ava's eyes immediately lit up with hope and excitement as she looked at him. She pulled him into a tight embrace, her face full of pride as she told him what a wonderful son he was. Then, she turned to my stepfather with a pleading look in her eyes. "Darling, they are twins after all, and you've always mentioned wanting the most capable child to eventually take over the family business," she reminded him. She was clearly trying to set the stage for Tyler's return. "Why don't we wait until the final SAT results come in before we make a permanent decision on who stays?" she suggested. She wanted the final outcome to be based on which one of us proved to be more successful. "In the meantime, it only makes sense for Tyler to stay here with us," she added. As my stepfather began to hesitate, Tyler immediately turned on the tears and put on his best victim performance. "Dad, you have no idea how hard it's been since our uncle and aunt took over my bedroom back home," he sobbed. He claimed that he didn't even have a quiet place to sit down and focus on his studies at night. "If you just let me stay here temporarily, I promise I won't let you down," he pleaded. As soon as he finished speaking, he shot me a quick, arrogant look of pure provocation. My stepfather eventually gave in and agreed to let Tyler stay with us for the time being. That night, Tyler waltzed into my bedroom and took a slow, deliberate look around the space. "You know, this room feels so familiar to me because it really should have been mine all along," he remarked. He leaned in closer and told me that I shouldn't be so arrogant as to think I was the only person who had been reborn. I just gave him a faint, knowing smile in response to his confession. From the very second he showed up at our front door, I had a strong feeling that he had also returned from the dead. I knew for a fact that the old version of Tyler would never have had the courage to pull off the stunts he was trying now. He walked slowly toward me, his eyes full of a new kind of confidence. "My dear brother, you were such a fool for letting our uncle and aunt walk all over you and kick you out of your own room," he sneered. He mocked me for being so weak that I ended up sleeping on the floor in a dusty storage closet. "You let them treat you like dirt, and you really thought I cared about that pathetic little cottage?" he asked. He told me that his goals were much bigger than some small-town house, and that he was here to reclaim everything that he felt belonged to him. "You're an idiot if you think having a few memories of the past is going to be enough to get rid of me," he said with a laugh. He didn't even wait for me to respond, seemingly satisfied with just seeing the look of supposed shock on my face. After strutting around the room like he owned the place, he finally left with a smug look of satisfaction. As soon as the door closed, My expression of shock melted away into a dark, knowing smile. Everything I had done up to that point was completely calculated and intentional. I had known for quite some time that Tyler had also been given a second chance at life. Word had gotten back to me that he had a suspicious accident at school where he fell from a second-story balcony. When he finally woke up in the hospital, he was apparently mumbling nonsense about sending gifts to Lexi and how he was destined to be a rich socialite. That was the moment I knew for certain that the Tyler from my previous life was back. I intentionally held back on my midterm exams just to trick him into thinking I was struggling with the curriculum at my new school. In my first life, I never even got the chance to take my SATs, whereas he came back with all of his memories and a false sense of confidence. He thought he had the upper hand because he knew what to expect. But Tyler had forgotten the most important detail of all, which is that I didn't drop out because I was a bad student. The only reason I couldn't finish school back then was because I simply didn't have a penny to my name. I had to ensure that he was truly back and that he would stay right where I could see him. After all, how else was I supposed to slowly and methodically exact my revenge for everything he had done? Ever since Tyler moved into the Sterling estate, we had been making the daily commute to school together. On the surface, he appeared to be the perfect, dedicated student, keeping his desk lamp on late into the night. But I knew better than to believe his little performance, because I could tell he wasn't doing a lick of actual schoolwork. He spent all his time either glued to influencer live streams or buried in his collection of comics. Somehow, he managed to convince my stepfather that his late nights were a sign of academic dedication. Meanwhile, I just stuck to my disciplined routine of waking up early and getting my work done. The knowledge I had gained in my previous life was permanently etched into my mind, so keeping up with the coursework wasn't a challenge for me at all. Then, on a quiet Sunday evening, Tyler suddenly burst out of his room with tears streaming down his face. He clung to Ava's arm and looked directly at my stepfather with a voice that was thick with fake emotion. He complained that his guest room was far too small and that he had even seen rats scurrying around in the damp corners. "Is there any way I could be moved into a slightly better room?" he pleaded. It was painfully obvious that he was setting the stage to try and take my bedroom for himself. Even though the Sterling mansion was enormous, my room and a master suite were the only ones that were truly spacious and filled with natural sunlight. The rest of the rooms were essentially just standard, functional guest quarters. My stepfather shot a hesitant glance in my direction, clearly feeling a bit conflicted about the request. Ava didn't wait for him to speak and immediately declared that because of Tyler's supposedly fragile health, he was the one who truly needed the sunnier room. Besides, he's been working so hard on his studies lately that I'm sure it won't matter to you where you sleep, she added. I saw Tyler give me another one of his incredibly smug, self-satisfied smiles. I had long since given up on expecting any kind of fairness from Ava. It was perfectly clear from her tone that she simply assumed I would continue to be the one making all the sacrifices for Tyler's benefit. Instead of putting up a fight, I simply nodded and agreed to the room swap without any hesitation. In truth, this was actually the perfect opportunity for me to expose the truth about his so-called hard work. I gave her a simple, okay, and she didn't even bother to thank me because she and Tyler had already decided this was how it was going to be. They had obviously been planning this little maneuver behind my back for days. The two of them were working together to slowly push me out of the family circle. The only thing keeping me in the house was the fact that my stepfather still had a decent opinion of me and was willing to give me a second chance despite my midterm scores. If I hadn't been careful, Tyler would have completely replaced me in the Sterling household by now. I was well aware that my stepfather's patience wouldn't last forever and that I only had one real shot at this. That works out perfectly, and since we're already talking about it, let me show you how well he's been keeping his current room, I said with a smile. I led both Ava and my stepfather down the hall and into Tyler's guest room. I casually reached out and pulled open his desk drawer, pressing down on the bottom panel to reveal a hidden compartment. Inside, I found a massive collection of high-end, limited edition comics packed away neatly. Some of those issues were worth thousands of dollars each and were nearly impossible to find without spending a fortune. I let out a soft gasp and did my best to look completely shocked by the discovery. Tyler immediately turned pale and rushed forward to try and slam the drawer shut before anyone could see more. He had been so preoccupied with his little victory that he had completely forgotten about the incriminating evidence he had hidden away. He was so caught up in the thrill of reclaiming his rightful room that he let his guard down for just a moment. Unfortunately for him, that moment was all I needed to expose him. I covered my mouth and let out a dramatic cry of amazement at the size of his comic collection. I told him how jealous I was that he found the time for hobbies while I was buried under a mountain of SAT prep books and practice exams. I can't believe you were able to afford all of these limited edition issues on your allowance, I added with a wide-eyed look. Both Ava and my stepfather were standing right there, and they could see every single expensive comic book for themselves. The worn edges of the comics made it perfectly clear that they had been read many times over and weren't just there for show. It was obvious to everyone in the room that Tyler had been spending his nights reading instead of studying, as he claimed. My stepfather had actually just recently increased Tyler's monthly allowance, and while he was wealthy, he was far from being a fool who liked being taken advantage of. He was starting to realize exactly where that extra money had been going. I wasn't done yet, as I spotted his phone charging on the desk with the screen still active. On the screen, the influencer Lexi was performing a suggestive dance for her live audience on TikTok. I picked up the phone and held it out so my stepfather could get a clear look at the content Tyler was consuming. I put on a look of pure horror and asked him how he could possibly be watching such inappropriate and trashy content at his age. Watching stuff like this is really going to mess with your head, I warned him while I casually navigated to the fan rankings for the channel. Right there in the number 5 spot was Tyler's username, glowing brightly for everyone to see. Based on his ranking, he must have spent at least $50,000 or $60,000 on that single channel alone. My stepfather might have been older, but his entire company was based in the tech industry, so he knew exactly what it meant to be a top donor on a platform like that. I had known all along that Tyler would eventually expose himself if he felt comfortable enough. All I had to do was make him believe that his plan to take over my life was going exactly the way he wanted. I let him feel a sense of smug satisfaction, knowing it would only lead to him getting careless with his secrets. Tyler was now visibly panicking as he reached out and snatched the phone away from me. He shot me a look of pure hatred before frantically turning to my stepfather to try and explain the situation. He claimed that the account actually belonged to me and that he was only using my money to send the gifts. It was such a pathetic and obvious lie that I didn't think for a second anyone would actually believe him. However, I was completely caught off guard when Ava suddenly stepped forward and slapped me across the face. How could you possibly be so cruel as to make your brother do your dirty work and then try to frame him for it? She screamed. She demanded to know where Tyler would even get that kind of money to send gifts on my behalf. She seemed to have conveniently forgotten that back in Iowa, she never dared to give Tyler a cent for fear of my stepfather finding out about her dishonesty. She was so desperate to protect him that she was willing to ignore the obvious truth. Ever since I moved into the Sterling estate, my own allowance had practically vanished in a thin air due to one excuse after another. Meanwhile, Tyler's personal spending money had somehow increased exponentially during the same time. It was painfully obvious that she had been funneling the family money directly into Tyler's pockets. I held my stinging cheek and told her that I hadn't even received an allowance in months, so there was no way I could afford to send gifts to anyone. My stepfather's expression hardened as he became increasingly suspicious of what was really going on. He turned to Ava and reached out his hand, demanding that she hand over her phone so he could check the financial records. Ava froze in place, her fingers white from gripping her phone so tightly as she searched for some kind of excuse. When she saw the icy look in my stepfather's eyes, she had no choice but to hand the device over with trembling hands. My stepfather quickly pulled up the transfer history and saw exactly what I had suspected all along. Nearly every single dollar he had given Ava for household expenses had been moved directly into Tyler's personal bank account. The total amount of money that had actually made its way to me was barely a few $100s. I couldn't help but let a small smirk play on my lips as I waited for the inevitable explosion of anger from my stepfather. He threw the phone back onto the sofa and let out a cold, mocking laugh at the sheer audacity of her behavior. He pointed out that while she was technically my mother, she had shown a level of favoritism that was absolutely disgraceful. Hearing him say those words felt like a punch to the gut, and I felt something inside me finally break for good. I couldn't help but wonder why there was such a massive divide in the way she treated her own twin sons. I wondered if it was because I had always been the one to step back and let Tyler have his way, or if she simply loved him more because he was better at playing the victim. I knew I would likely never get a real answer to that question. The most painful realization of all was that the only person willing to stand up for me was a man I had only known for a few months. My own biological mother was more than happy to watch me suffer as long as it benefited Tyler. My stepfather could have easily just picked whichever one of us seemed more useful and ignore the other entirely. Instead, he had chosen to stand by me and demand that I be treated with some basic level of respect and fairness. A wave of genuine emotion washed over me, and I felt hot tears beginning to track down my face. Ava stood there in silence, taking the full force of my stepfather's anger without saying a single word in her own defense. My stepfather made it very clear that the room swap was officially canceled and that I wouldn't be giving up my space for anyone. He announced that from that moment on, he would be handling my allowance himself to ensure the money actually reached me. I watched my stepfather walk out of the room, my vision becoming a blur as more tears filled my eyes. He might have been older and didn't have any children of his own, but I knew that his feelings for Ava had always been genuine. Even in my previous life, he had made sure to keep a room available for me in case I ever needed it, even though he hadn't formally brought me to Chicago. I realized now that I had probably misinterpreted his actions as a sign of coldness when he was actually trying to give me options. Looking back, it seemed likely that he only wanted to bring one of us at a time to prevent the exact kind of toxic sibling rivalry we were now engaged in. He had probably hoped to avoid a situation where two brothers were constantly at each other's throats for his favor. In my first life, I was too young and hurt to understand, and I simply felt like I had been abandoned by my own family. I eventually found out that my stepfather had gone through a similar ordeal with his own brother, which had left them estranged for decades. He was terrified of seeing history repeat itself with me and Tyler, which is why he had been so cautious with us. I really wished I could tell him that some people are just naturally toxic and will never truly value the bonds of family no matter how much you give them. If you give some people an inch, they will always try to take a mile and step all over you in the process. Ava and Tyler both shot me looks of pure venom, and Tyler screamed at me, asking if this was the outcome I had been aiming for all along. "I'm not going anywhere, and I'm going to make sure that you're the one who ends up out on the street," he threatened. I didn't even bother to respond because I knew that trying to reason with someone like him was a complete waste of my time. After a solid month of non-stop studying and practice tests, the day of the SATs finally arrived. My stepfather actually took a full day off from work just so he could personally drive both Tyler and me to the testing center. Before we left the house, Ava was hovering over Tyler, constantly reminding him to watch the time and stay calm. She even went to the trouble of packing him a hot, nutritious breakfast to make sure he had plenty of energy for the exam. When it came time to say goodbye to me, she just casually tossed a stale bag of bread in my direction. She didn't even bother to wish me luck or say a single encouraging word as I headed out the door. My stepfather clearly noticed the look of hurt in my eyes and immediately told the kitchen staff to pack his own breakfast into my bag instead. He was trying his best to make up for Ava's blatant lack of maternal affection. It was a strange feeling to experience a sense of fatherly love from a man I wasn't even related to. He was already proving to be far more supportive and responsible than my biological father had ever been during his life. Just as we were leaving, I caught Ava and Tyler exchanging a secret, knowing look with each other. I didn't think much of it at the time until I was standing in line for the security check at the testing center. I reached into my bag to pull out my registration card and froze when I saw the name and photo on the ID. It wasn't mine at all, and it was in that moment that I finally realized just how far Ava was willing to go to get rid of me. I could almost understand her wanting to protect Tyler and keep her favorite son close to her at any cost. I knew that her bond with him was something I would never be able to compete with. But I was absolutely not going to let her use my future as a stepping stone for Tyler's success. Right as I was processing the shock, my phone vibrated with an incoming iMessage from Ava. Her message was a direct threat, telling me that I was required to write Tyler's name on my own exam paper. She claimed that as my mother, she had the absolute right to decide exactly how my life and my future should be handled. Thankfully, I had already learned exactly what kind of person she was, so her words didn't have the power to hurt me anymore. I had already spent an entire lifetime being treated like garbage and dragged through the dirt because of her. She couldn't even bring herself to offer me a single word of kindness or ask me to stay with the family. Yet the second Tyler put on his act of being a helpless victim, she would immediately fold and give him whatever he wanted. I didn't bother responding to her text and simply took a screenshot of the message to send to my stepfather. He had already started driving away, but as soon as he saw the evidence, he pulled a U-turn and headed straight back to the center. He arrived at the entrance of the testing center just as we were about to walk through the doors for the exam. He stepped forward and grabbed Tyler by the arm with a level of authority I had never seen from him before. "Give your brother his identification card right now," he demanded in a low, dangerous voice. Only seconds before, Tyler had been whispering in my ear about how he was going to make sure I was kicked out of the Sterling family for good. Tyler's face went completely pale as he realized his plan had been exposed. He quickly tried to pivot back to his innocent act, claiming that he had simply made a mistake and grabbed the wrong car by accident. My stepfather wasn't buying a single word of it and coldly told him that I was the one he needed to apologize to. Tyler was forced to lower his head in shame, not daring to say another word in his own defense. My stepfather turned to me and gave my shoulder a reassuring pat, telling me to put the drama out of my mind and focus on doing my best. I still wasn't sure how he truly felt about me, but I knew he was the only ally I had in that moment. At the very least, he had chosen to take my side when it mattered most. I was starting to realize that in this high-stakes world, actual emotional sincerity was far less important than results. The only thing that truly mattered was that I proved my worth by getting the best scores possible. I had to show him that I was a valuable asset worth investing in, and I simply nodded in agreement. The school bell rang to signal the start of the exam, and my stepfather turned to head back to his car. Before Tyler walked into the room, he made sure to shoot me one last look of pure, unadulterated hatred. During the agonizingly long wait for our scores to be released, neither Ava nor Tyler gave me a single moment of peace. They spent their days glaring at me and making snide remarks about how selfish I was for not just giving my opportunity to Tyler. When the results were finally released, Tyler saw that he had scored in the 500s, while my own score was listed as confidential by the state system. Tyler rushed over to my stepfather with a smug grin, clearly thinking I had failed miserably. "James, did you actually get disqualified for cheating this time?" he mocked, asking why I always insisted on taking the easy way out. Ava immediately jumped in to support him, looking at my stepfather with a face full of feigned disappointment. "I'm so sorry, darling. It seems I really failed as a mother and allowed James to embarrass the family name," she said with a sigh. She suggested that it was time for me to move out and that they should focus all their resources on helping Tyler get into a top-tier university next year. I didn't say a word as I watched the two of them put on their little performance for my stepfather. He remained silent as well, though I could feel his gaze fixed on me, waiting to see how I would respond to their accusations. It felt like he was testing me to see if I would crack under the pressure of their manipulative behavior. My calm demeanor seemed to be exactly what he was looking for, because he let out a short, cold laugh that cut through the tension. "Only the top 1% of scores are hidden by the system to prevent them from being leaked early. So are you two really that ignorant, or just pretending to be?" he asked. Both Ava and Tyler stared at him with wide eyes, insisting that it was impossible for someone like me to achieve such a high ranking. My stepfather just gave another cold snort of derision and asked them if they were really that blind to what I had been doing. He pointed out that I had been meticulously controlling my scores on previous tests to just barely hit the passing mark with perfect precision. And then there's you, Tyler, who was clearly trying to copy from everyone around you during the exam. He added, asking him if he really thought he was that unobservant. I was genuinely impressed by how much he had actually noticed about Tyler's behavior. It was clear that he had been paying much closer attention to both of us than we had ever realized. At that moment, my respect for him as a businessman and a man of observation grew even stronger. Tyler was too terrified to even lift his head as Ava frantically questioned him about the cheating allegations. He continued to deny everything until the phone rang and Ava heard the voice of an admissions officer from an Ivy League university on the other end. The recruiter informed us that my scores were high enough for me to have my pick between the two most prestigious universities in the country. Ava's face went pale, and she literally collapsed onto the floor in a state of complete shock as my stepfather stood over her. I think it's time for a divorce because I can't risk you showing this level of favoritism if we ever have children of our own, he said firmly. Ava just sat there on the floor, looking like she had been struck by lightning, unable to process the words he had just spoken. She reached out and grabbed his pant leg, begging him with a trembling voice not to leave her. She swore that she would never show Tyler favoritism again and promised to cut him out of her life entirely if that's what it took to stay. Besides, James is a top student now, and his success reflects well on both of us as his parents, she argued desperately. She questioned why I would ever remain loyal to him if he decided to cast my own mother aside so easily. If you divorce me, all the time and money you spent on him will have been for nothing, she hissed. My stepfather's gaze was like ice as he calmly told her that he intended to continue supporting my education regardless of their marital status. Ava seemed to lose all the strength in her body and went completely limp on the floor, her spirit finally broken. Tyler, on the other hand, absolutely lost his mind and started screaming at my stepfather in a fit of pure rage. His outburst didn't last long before the Sterling security detail arrived and promptly escorted both him and Ava out of the mansion. My stepfather turned to me with a deep, thoughtful look in his eyes and asked if I thought he was being too cruel to them. I looked through the window at the two of them as they were being forced off the property and felt nothing but a cold sense of detachment. I told him that when someone becomes that consumed by greed, they no longer deserve to have anything at all. It was clear that my answer was exactly what he wanted to hear, and he gave me a small nod of approval. On the day I was set to start my new life at university, Ava called me, and the very first words out her mouth were a demand for money. She claimed that Tyler had actually stolen every last bit of her secret savings just to send more digital gifts to that influencer Lexi. She told me she was completely broke and had no way to even pay her basic bills. I wasn't the least bit surprised by her news and felt a strange sense of satisfaction that karma had finally caught up with her. I kept my voice perfectly even as I told her that she was no longer a part of my life. My stepfather already left you that house in Iowa, so you should stop being so greedy and be thankful for what you have, I told her before hanging up. At the end of the day, I had finally found the strength to tell her that our relationship was officially over. In my first life, I met a tragic end on a cold construction site, but this time I finally learned that sacrifice isn't always a virtue. True maturity is realizing that you don't need the approval of people who never treated you with fairness or respect in the first place.